Senior Wealth Advisor and CFP with Mariner Wealth Advisors. Today I'm joined by Julia Rodgers. She is the CEO and founder of HelloPrenup.com. Thank you so much for joining us today, Julia.
Thank you for having me, Valerie.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this topic just because I do get a lot of questions. But I guess one of my first questions for you is what's the reaction you get when you tell people the industry that you work in?
They say, like, wait a minute, is that like a prenup? Like a prenup? And I'm like, yeah, like before you get married, a legal contract. And it takes people a minute and then they laugh.
Yeah.
And I get that a lot because I wear my Hello Prenup hat when I'm out and about. And people are always like, wait, what is that?
That's amazing. Yeah, and I would think, okay, so from my perspective, and I think from a lot of clients, they just think that sounds really smart, but like who does that? And why, what is that exactly? Maybe let's just start there. Like what exactly is a prenup?
Yeah, so a prenup is a private contract that is created by two fiancés who plan to get married, and they execute it prior to marriage, and it doesn't go into effect until they are married. That's a really common misconception, is that you can get a prenup after you're married. You cannot. That's called a postnup.
Okay, perfect. And so when you are creating the prenup, I guess that's really when you're starting to decide what is it that people put into a prenup?
Yeah, so you're deciding what assets are yours alone, what
Okay.
are yours together as a couple, and what happens to things like inheritance, any potential business. Is your partner going to get equity in that business? Are they going to, is part of that business, whatever portion of that business you own, going to be considered marital or community property that could be subject to division upon a divorce? What happens to Fluffy? You have this dog that you got together, or maybe one of you had prior to the relationship, and what happens to the dog? So these are all things that need to be talked about, I think, before you get married, but also can go into a prenup.
Okay, cool. And so what about stuff though, what if Fluffy happens after you guys get married or 5 years down the road, what if I don't know, what are some of the other things that maybe could be more future related that maybe someone could
Yes.
put into a contract?
Yeah, so financial things, right? You can't say like, I mean, I guess you could, but I haven't really seen it. If we get a dog in 10 years, then maybe what will happen. So it's hard to do that, but you
Sure.
can look at it from a financial perspective. So those life conversations are really important. If you are getting married and you plan to have children in the future, you
Mhm.
cannot dictate in a prenup what will happen to those children. So you can't dictate
Okay.
child custody or child support, but what you can do is say, okay, if one of us plans to take a step back from our career, usually the
Mhm.
woman, or maybe stop working for a couple of years, what does that look like financially? And how can we use this prenup to even things out? So you
Hmm.
can say, like, for example, you can allocate certain assets to the other party in the event you have children, or you can waive alimony except for if you have
Hmm.
children. So you can get really creative in the idea behind these different clauses. The reason I encourage this creative thinking, and our platform offers it, is because women are usually the ones who take a step back from their career, stop working. And then if they get divorced in the future, state law, it just isn't going to allocate them enough, right?
Hmm.
They've
Okay.
lost years of earning capacity. Their spouse's career is a straight trajectory upwards. What does that mean for them in their financial future? So that is something that is like really important future planning that you can talk about now.
Yeah. And so, you mentioned your platform. I am really curious about that too. But I think that's how we started talking, is just because there is, tell me a little bit more about what Hello Prenup is and how that came into fruition.
Yeah, so HelloPrenup's the first digital platform that allows couples to create a prenup online in hours instead of months. And
Hmm.
it's a fraction of the cost of what you would hire a traditional lawyer. And so it came, the idea came to me when I was working at a law firm and I was speaking to a bunch of potential clients who were really interested in prenups, most of whom were millennials. And there
Okay.
were like three core complaints that they had. Number one, why do I have to hire a divorce lawyer? Nobody wanted to hire
Hmm.
the divorce lawyer before they get married, right? Felt really
That's not
uncomfortable,
romantic. Yeah.
not romantic. And they're like, we know we want this agreement. We both
Hmm.
agree as to what's supposed to go into it. So like, why are we engaging these professionals in this, what feels like a really adversarial process?
Hmm.
So that was issue one. Number two was the timing. With a lawyer and with my old firm specifically, it took a minimum of 3 months. And that is really logical when you're trying to coordinate two professionals, the attorneys, who are
Hmm.
speaking with their clients and then negotiating amongst each other and putting together a draft and showing it to their clients. And I mean, it really does take 3 months, right? But couples would say, like, okay, I'm getting married in a month. And does that mean I
Mm.
can't get a prenup? And I would say, no, you should, but like, I can't help you. And so I think a
Right.
lot of those couples would not end up getting a prenup. To me,
Okay.
that was really disappointing. And then issue number three was the cost. So to hire an attorney, it can range from like $2,500 to like $15,000, right? I've
Jeez.
heard some crazy price. Even California has like the most expensive prenups, I swear.
Hmm.
And so a lot of people would say to me, like, even for the $2,500 retainer, they're like, oh, like we've just spent all this money on our wedding. This is really expensive. Like, do we need, is there any way we can save money on this? And like, unfortunately, you're each hiring attorneys and it costs money. Like, it's
Hmm.
expensive. And so I thought, is there a way that we can offer this service cheaper? Now, through attorneys, it's really hard, but with technology, it's plausible, right? And so it was really disappointing to me that a lot of people walked away not getting a prenup and not protecting their assets or having those really important conversations that a prenup facilitates because it was going to cost a little bit more and they just didn't feel like they could budget for it. So that's how Hello Prenup came to me.
That's great. And so many things about that are super interesting. First off, both in the traditional way, there's two attorneys that are, so it's like my client versus your client. And so it just comes across as adversarial. I mean, is that frequently is the prenup, I guess, the process supposed to be adversarial? Like, is that what the experience is like?
It's not supposed to be, but it oftentimes is.
Oh, okay.
Because
Okay.
when you think about, I mean, with Hello Prenup, it's not. So I'll tell you the
Okay.
difference. But
Okay.
when you think about what an attorney's job is, their job is to advocate zealously for their client's best
Hmm.
interest. And so when you hire an attorney, that is what they're doing. And they're doing the best that they can given what they've been taught. The
Hmm.
problem is a lot of times when people are getting married and negotiating these contracts, it starts to cause problems. And the attorney process is very different than the Hello Prenup process. And I'll tell you why. With an attorney, one party goes to their lawyer, says, I want a prenup. Another
Hmm.
party simultaneously or after the fact may hire an attorney, right? But let's start with party
Hmm.
one. Their attorney puts together a draft, and that draft is presented to the other side. That's a fully formed draft. Already, you have a power dynamic at play.
Hmm.
Now,
Yeah.
oftentimes, the person who is getting the prenup drafted in the first place is the one with more money. So now we are playing into this power dynamic by having them present this fully formed draft to the weaker party who's
Hmm.
saying, oh my God, I feel attacked. This is uncomfortable. I need to protect myself, and goes to a lawyer and says, I'm upset. Now I need to fight back and put something in here that's for me, right? And the problem with this process is it ends up being this ping pong back and forth where, frankly, I just don't know that the attorneys always have the soft skills that are
Hmm.
necessary to help preserve the relationship. Hello Prenup is so different. And this is like, I'm not trying to, put out an ad for Hello Prenup here, but the reason I developed it differently is because I think these points are really important. So it's a collaborative process.
Hmm.
One party signs up, they invite their fiance. Okay, that's it. Now they individually fill out their questionnaires and then they negotiate through the platform. And then the platform outputs a draft agreement. So the first time either of them see that draft agreement is when they've done all of the negotiating together already. And then if they want to take that document to an attorney, and many of our users do
Oh,
this,
interesting.
they can take that draft to an attorney and there's a baseline understanding and nobody feels like they're being trampled by the other. And the attorneys know where the parties are landing on certain issues before they start the heavy negotiations or changes.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the first thing, it just seems like you have to be on the defensive if you're presented by a contract that an attorney drafted.
Yeah.
So absolutely, that would
Yeah.
definitely avoid that. And you mentioned that usually it's the party with the most assets. And with Hello Prenup, I guess, and with your experience, is that always the case? That it's always going to be that party? It's the has versus the have not.
It's not always the case.
Okay.
And I think especially with millennials, things are
Hmm.
changing. Millennials view relationships differently. They view marriage differently. We're not in the 1950s relationship anymore, right? We're looking at parties as two independent, equally powerful individuals with career trajectories.
Hmm.
And so oftentimes what we see is they are both saying, okay, we agree, a prenup seems like a good idea. They are investigating their options online. They find Hello Prenup, and then one of them signs up. There's not always this great wealth inequity between the parties when they sign up. Of course, there are instances when there are, but that's not at play as much. I think because they're looking for information first, and they're finding that information at Hello Prenup.
Okay. And so what kind of you mentioned millennials. I guess historically you would think, okay, you come to a prenup because there is a generational dynasty of wealth that has been built up. But what's the reality now? What are you seeing as far as, asset level, income potential that come in?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I would say well over 50% of our users are millennials. If you were to count in Gen Zs, that number is much higher.
Hmm.
And there are a couple of reasons that millennials are getting prenups today. One of them, it has to do with generational wealth, and it's because boomers
Okay.
are set to transfer down about, I think the number is $80 trillion in wealth.
Wow.
And they're saying, I think a prenup would be a good idea, because those boomer parents are doing estate planning now, and they're looking at it, and saying, how can I protect my child's inheritance? Well, if they're getting married, a prenup is a great way to do it. And I think, it's prenups are more accepted now. So there's
Hmm.
less of this pushback from one party, the less wealthy spouse being like, well, hold on a minute. Why am I getting cut out of everything? Because
Yeah.
oftentimes it's both sides whose parents are saying to them, a prenup wouldn't be a bad idea.
Okay.
They're meeting in the middle and saying, maybe you're right.
Okay. Yeah. And so it seems like it's much more of a, I don't want to say intellectual exercise, but it's like this is just part of our planning that we are going to be cognizant of what we're doing as opposed to, a power grab or just greed or anything like that.
Yeah, it's really a financial planning tool. And I think it helps facilitate, like I said earlier, those life conversations.
Hmm.
I think especially when we talk about inheritance, it's
Hmm.
really important that you have that conversation prior to marriage,
Yeah.
because people don't think about inheritance when they're getting married. They think, if you have both parents who are alive and well, you're not looking at what's going to happen 10, 20 years down the road. But certain states say that inheritance, once it's received during the marriage, is marital.
Hmm.
Some states say it is not. If you haven't had that conversation, you don't know where you're landing on it. And if you don't have a prenup, that is going to be dictated by your state's laws, and you
Right.
may not like the outcome.
Yeah, yeah. And, some people that are just now coming to realize that this prenup could have been a good idea, but they're already married. Um, is postnup, is that a possibility for married couples?
Yeah, so post-ups are gaining popularity.
Okay.
And I would say over the last like 5 to 6 years, I've heard of them more and more and more. And I think, post-ups are great. They are less readily enforced by courts than prenups are. I say they're like the prenups of like 10 years ago. Courts were like,
Okay.
There's a little more scrutiny, and now there's still more scrutiny on postnups rather than prenups. So if you
Okay.
have the option of getting a prenup, get a prenup. But if your wedding date has passed, then you can consider a postnup, but with the awareness that there's more scrutiny. The courts are aware that with postnups, there are often power dynamics at play.
Okay.
People don't get postnups when their marriage is perfect, right? They're getting
Uh,
them to save their marriage. Usually one party is saying, if we don't get this, we're getting divorced. And
mm.
courts know that. So, in Massachusetts, for example, you can't get a postnup in contemplation of a divorce, right?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So that's, in what is in contemplation of a divorce, there's a lot of case law around this, but, it becomes a little bit more complicated when you deal with enforcement of postnups than prenups.
So you had mentioned to me that there is a legal definition, or I guess, what am I trying to say? There's a legal structure that makes a prenup more feasible than a postnup. Can you explain that to me?
Yeah, so I think you may be talking about some of the requirements to get a prenup.
Uh-huh.
So, in order to get a valid prenup, different states have different requirements, right? So, um, you know, in California, for example, you must present the final version of the agreement at least 7 days before it's signed, right? That's one example.
Okay. Yeah.
In Massachusetts, when enforcing a prenup, a court will look at, was it fair and reasonable at the time it was executed? And is it fair and reasonable at the time that it is being enforced, right? Depending on the state you're in, prenups will be enforced differently. And then, postnups are very different in that they have a different set of requirements for validity and enforcement, right? And that, again, is very state dependent. But
Okay.
again, they are looked at with greater scrutiny than prenups are.
Okay. Okay. Well, I want to, I think probably the meat or the heart of the matter, I suppose, is talking about how you even have this conversation when you're trying to be real romantic and, make these huge decisions. But we're going to go ahead and end today. And that's our teaser for our next episode, because that is, I think, a really important part of this conversation. Julia, thank you for joining us today. For
Thank you for
everyone
having
listening,
me.
absolutely. You were listening to Your Life Simplified. Be sure to subscribe, and we will catch you next time.
Thank you.
Mariner Wealth Advisors, or MWA, is an SEC-registered investment advisor with its principal place of business in the state of Kansas. Registration of an investment advisor does not imply a certain level of skill or training. MWA is in compliance with the current notice filing requirements imposed upon registered investment advisors by those states in which MWA maintains clients. MWA may only transact business in those states in which it is notice filed or qualifies for an exemption or exclusion from notice filing requirements. Any subsequent direct communication by MWA with a prospective client shall be conducted by a representative that is either registered or qualifies for an exemption or exclusion from registration in the state where the prospective client resides. For additional information about MWA, including fees and services, please contact MWA or refer to the Investment Advisor Public Disclosure website at www.advisorinfo.sec.gov. Please read the disclosure statement carefully before you invest or send money. The views expressed in this podcast is for educational purposes only and do not take into account any individual personal, financial, legal, or tax considerations. As such, the information contained herein is not intended to be personal, legal, investment, or tax advice. Nothing herein should be relied upon as such, and there is no guarantee that any claims made will come to pass. The opinions are based on information and sources of information deemed to be reliable, but Mariner Wealth Advisors does not warrant the accuracy of the information. The guest today is not affiliated with Mariner Wealth Advisors, and their opinions expressed are their own. Certified Financial Planner, trademark, CFP, registered trademark, and federally registered CFP with flame design marks, collectively the CFP registered marks, are professional certification marks granted in the United States by Certified Financial Planner Board of Standards, Inc., also CFP Board. The CFP, registered trademark, certification is a voluntary certification. No federal or state law or regulation requires financial planners to hold the CFP certification.